A lot is thrown at us in the initial Dune trailer for the movie set to come out later this year, but I'm surprised how much they sidelined the most iconic figure in the entire series. Not like it's a bad thing though, because it does add to the whole mystique behind Sandworms. I won't be spoiling since I'm sure some haven't read the books, and the anticipated film won't be out for months, so I'll try to just strictly stick to the lore without mentioning any of the plot. But I'll just say, Sandworms will play a major role. The name Dune is just another way of referring to the planet this story takes place. A more informal title, named after the sandy desert that covers it entirely. I know, another sci-fi story taking place in a desert location, but Dune came out in the 60s. The author Frank Herbert was a really interesting guy who kinda paved the way for sci-fi franchises. Humans didn't always inhabit Dune, the formal name for the planet being Arrakis. This desolate planet was ruled by the Sandworms, long before the migration of man. For thousands of years, they burrowed through the desolate planet without any space scientist able to conclude much research on them, since they are such effective killers of any other life form. It's believed that the Sandworms' lifespan can stretch for thousands of years, and they grow up to 450 meters long. So these things are like ancient, extra-long underground subway trains with mouths. Oh, and they have armor. Well, not really armor, more like scales. So there's not much you can do if you're spotted by one out in the open desert. Since they're subterranean, it's not like they have eyes, or even a head for that matter. So sensed instead of spotted would be a better term. Sandworms can sense rhythmic vibrations on the sand surface, and immediately make their move, regardless of what it may be. They'll even attack each other because they're so territorial. And if this massive monster wasn't overpowered enough, Wormy also gets teeth. With a mouth that wide in diameter, I'm not sure what it would need teeth for. I guess it's just for fighting off other sandworms. This iteration for the sandworm is the first I've ever seen this design for its mouth. It's a lot more nightmare fuel compared to the other artists' work I've seen online. The teeth do have some unique properties, regardless of how the mouth is shaped. We only know about them because they're used as weapons after pulling them out of a sandworm corpse. The teeth are exceptionally sharp, and 20 centimeters long with a strange color to it. It appears milky white at first, and iridescent when light hits it at the right angle. With its size, senses, armor, and teeth, you can see why it's difficult to conduct any research on them. So why bother living here on Arrakis, aka Dune, when there's a sea of habitable planets within the Dune universe? The first group of space-traveling humans who decided to pitch tent here stuck around after realizing the most valuable resource in the known universe can be found here, and it's thanks to the sandworms that it even exists. There's no water, barely any plant or wildlife, but there is something called the spice melange. The spice, when ingested, can prolong your lifespan and even allow you to have almost psychic awareness. It's described as smelling and tasting like cinnamon, but then also described as never tasting the same twice. The spice is highly addictive and does give the user a euphoric sensation. That's why it's considered a narcotic. The entire civilization on Dune revolved around the spice, created deep within the deserts by the sandworms. They all put up with the inhospitable planet for it. A group of people who live out in the deserts in rocky formations are called the Fremen. They're the ones exposed to most of the dangers of the planet, while the others who prefer a safer lifestyle live in shielded communities away from the sandworms. Though the story is set way into the future, the Fremen are primitive in a futuristic kind of sense. They're the ones who wield the sandworm teeth as sacred weapons they call a crysknife. They look at the worms as a physical embodiment of God. Out in the deep desert, they have the most access to the spice, and after ingesting so much of it during their lifetimes, their senses are acutely tuned for survival out here, but at the cost of losing their life the moment they are unable to get a hold of their addiction. Oh, and their eyes turn blue, like completely blue. The iris, the whites in the eyes, everything, blue. I think the 2021 Dune movie went with just a blue iris color to not dehumanize some of the characters that they want to be likable for viewers. I was really curious how they were going to handle this part of the story, and they went with throwing it out the window. It's all good though. But back to the spice and Dune's complete monopoly over the universe's most valuable export. During the process in which the sandworms make this planet fit to their liking, in the middle of a natural chemical reaction, spice is created. It seemed like the planet Arrakis wasn't always a desert wasteland. Instead, it had open bodies of water, like other inhabited planets in this world. But water is painfully lethal for a sandworm, so they succeeded in eliminating every bit of water on this planet with their life cycle process. I'm gonna try and break this down the best way I can, but it isn't the most explicitly explained part of the story, because no character was around to witness this part of history. It was just the sandworms. So the worms, like other creatures in our real life, experience metamorphic phases of development before they actually become a fully fledged sandworm, like a butterfly or other insects. It seems like they start off as a microscopic sand plankton, which does complicate things because the sandworm's diet mainly comprises of only sand and sand plankton. Yeah, they eat sand. It's almost like they're not even alive. We don't know their reproductive cycle, but the sand planktons become something called sand trout over time. Imagine these guys being the larvae, small little leathery creatures about the size of your hand that block off all water by seeking it out. Massive groups of sand trout will surround a body of water, preventing sandworms from ever coming in contact with it. But when the sand trout's excretions mix with water, gases begin to produce until enough pressure and heat make it erupt from beneath the desert sand to the surface. This natural mixture is the spice melange. The few sand trout that survive the explosion enter a dormant state for 6 years to emerge as young sandworms, already 3 meters long. They begin their millennia-long life as a god among men. Hope that was easy to follow, because I was a bit lost reading through it in the first book. So many aspects of this story is pretty remarkably detailed, except for this part. Purposely though, of course. Obviously, the author is also just way out of my league when it comes to the English language and biology, because I had a hard time wrapping my head around the conceptualization of sandworms and the steps it takes to create one. I tried to dumb it down here. The only way for the people of Dune to survive, now that the sandworms have successfully terraformed the planet, is to rely on them for oxygen, now that plant life barely exists here. I always like the illustrations of sandworms with a fleshy flower-like mouth opening, because these things are kind of like mobile predator plants, a Venus flytrap on wheels. Not many creatures in fiction I can think of that produce and release oxygen instead of carbon dioxide. Humans' biggest danger, aside from dehydration, is also the same thing keeping them alive. The heat within a sandworm's body is like those terrifying factory furnaces, but a planet rich in oxygen isn't enough to thrive. The sandworms are still the true rulers of Dune without any accessible water, and this is where the story begins. If you guys are just hearing about this series, I really do recommend giving the books a read through. It gave me a lot of enjoyment during quarantine. I will definitely be making more of these type of videos, even though I know I'll be butchering some of these fake names. And if you're looking for more content now, Quinn's Ideas here on YouTube is the go-to guy for all Dune related topics, so check his channel out. I'll see you guys next week. Thanks for watching.